Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Denis Gianoutsos. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos.
Hey there, listeners. Well, welcome to 2025. I want to say thank you for tuning in to the Leadership is Changing podcast. But as we step into a brand new year, I want to take a moment to reflect on the incredible journey we've had in 2024. Over the past year, I've been privileged to feature some amazing guests on this podcast, leaders, change makers, and innovators who shared their wisdom, experiences, and insights. And together we've explored what it means to lead in today's ever-changing world. Over the next month, we're going to bring you some of these highlights. And in the Highlights 2024 episodes, we're bringing you some of the most impactful moments and key takeaways from 2024. Now, these highlights capture the essence of what this podcast is all about, helping leaders like you thrive in times of change and complexity. Now, whether it's tips on being courageous, thinking outside the box, adapting, or navigating transitions to higher levels of leadership, these snippets are sure to inspire and energize you for the year ahead. And of course, these highlights are just the tip of the iceberg. If something resonates with you, I encourage you to go and check out the full interviews from 2024 to dive deeper into the incredible conversations we've had. So let's get into it. Here are the highlights from 2024 on the Leadership is Changing podcast. Nice. And, for a lot of our listeners, they'll be picking up that you've got a Kiwi accent. But you're living you're actually based in Spain at the moment, which is wonderful. And so do you travel a lot, do you?
Yes, well, I've been a perpetual traveller for about 13 years. I spent 8 years living on a yacht around Europe. And the last few months, we've swapped that for a motorhome. So we're traveling around Europe on a motorhome.
That's great. So that would be a little bit of a different sort of kind of lifestyle. And are you sort of one of these people, what we call a digital nomad?
Yeah, I guess you'd call it that. Yeah.
Yeah. And
perpetual seeker.
Yeah. And before you left, say, New Zealand to go traveling or, what else have you done in your life? So in other words, tell us a little bit more about your background. Of course, I've given the listeners a little bit of an introduction to you. But tell us more about you and what you've done.
Okay, well, I've always been in business for myself. I suppose you'd call me a serial entrepreneur. I've had 18 different businesses in my life of varying sizes and teams from just me to, teams of salespeople and so on. And along the way, I've always been very consumed and interested in trying to answer the question, how do you get the most out of life? How do you really achieve success? How do you live a life where you're feeling that you're living to your highest potential? So alongside running businesses and developing those, I was always a student of success, studying personal development and spirituality and business courses and things like that too. And that's really the basis of my work now, is helping people to understand really how to achieve that success. And I had a bit of a life-changing event in my mid-40s when I went from being a multi-millionaire and successful businessman to becoming homeless, losing everything. And that really pivoted me into a different direction and taught me a lot of things about how we do create true success in our life. And that also involves how we become a true leader, if that's our role and vocation.
Liam, when I work with leaders around the world, there is some of them who are bored in their jobs. They feel like they're achieving something and they're doing really well, but they're not actually fulfilled in life. And so one thing is that when we talk, they're actually wanting to go off and do a business or go and do something else outside of where they are working today. And they have this fear of actually making a decision and taking the leap and going and doing it. Now, for a lot of them, the fear is failure, or the fear is I might do okay, but I might lose everything. For you, when you went from that multimillionaire scenario of actually being homeless, what was it like for you to go from that scenario to the homeless side? And then what did you do to come out of it?
Well, the funny thing is, you mentioned something really key, which is fear. And I think most people, their lives are driven by subconscious fears. And when I became homeless, I realized that my entire life I had been driven subconsciously by two fundamental fears. One was the fear of not having enough, of losing what I had and not having enough. And that was what drove me to continually put pressure on myself, set higher goals, always try to achieve more, and really create a lot of stress and problems in my life as along the way, as well as creating some success. And the other fear that many people have, and that was driving me as well, was the fear of not being loved. But ironically, when I lost everything, I had to face and experience both of those fears, the fear of not having anything and the fear of not being loved. Because there I was sleeping on my mother's couch. I had to move into her small apartment and sleep on the couch in the living room. And I had the two things that I'd realized I'd been afraid of all my life, not having enough or not having anything and not being loved, they were there. I was faced with those as a reality. But something really interesting happened, and this was what made the shift. And I didn't really realize it at the time, but my work since has been about researching and then helping other people to understand this as well, which is when you actually make a shift or when you experience the things that you're afraid of, your brain does something very interesting. And it moves from having a fear of something to releasing that fear when you actually experience it. And when you release your fears, you actually activate a different part of your brain. This is actually science-based, what I have discovered and what I'm teaching. And so when I pivoted from being homeless to rebuilding my life, it was through using a different part of my brain. And that part of the brain only becomes activated when you don't have fear. And that's the key to it, really. And I think, in terms of leadership, and as you say, people, they're afraid of doing something different. They're afraid of maybe going after something that they think they might really enjoy, or they're afraid of getting unstuck from where they are and taking a risk, if you like. And it's not really their fault that their fear is keeping them stuck. But what actually happens on a biological level is that when you're afraid, even if it's a subconscious fear, you're using a different part of your brain, a part of your brain that will keep you stuck. So you have to learn how to release those fears so that when you do, you activate another part of your brain, which is the part that will move you forward, that is in fact responsible for all achievement and all moving forward, if you like, and all fulfillment in life. It only comes when you actually use another part of your brain.
That is fascinating. I love what you're sharing there. I think that's really cool. And I think the listeners, you will be getting a lot out of this already from Liam, listeners, because some great things he's sharing there. And Liam, this whole topic around the brain, the way we work, the way we think, the way we do things in life is fascinating. It really is. And Liam, I know that you've got a podcast as well. It's called Let Yourself Off the Hook. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Let yourself off the hook.
Yeah. And also you're a best-selling author and the creator of Brain Rebalancing. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, what I've created is a model of how the brain actually works. And it's a science-based model, although I don't use scientific terms because I make it in a way that's much easier to understand. But essentially what it says is, what my model has shown, is that you have 4 parts to your brain. And if you're not using these 4 parts of your brain correctly, you're going to have problems show up in your life. Because the thing is, the brain, in its essence, is nothing more than a machine. It's a biological machine, and it has a biological function. And the function of the brain is to ensure that you, as the owner of the brain, or every organism that has a brain, it's to ensure that that organism has the best chance for survival. All of nature is wired to survive as the primary purpose of all life. The primary function of all life is to seek to survive. And the way things best survive is by being the best that they can be. So literally, we have this machine which is designed to make us and every living thing the best that we can be so that we have the greatest chance for survival. And for humans, being the best that you can be doesn't just mean physically, it also means mentally and emotionally. So when you really think that one through, you realize that we have a biological purpose to be happy, to be fulfilled, to get the most out of life. And we're not biologically designed to have stress and problems, because stress and problems do not help us survive biologically. They weaken us physically and mentally and in many different ways. And so they actually get in the way. And if you think about this idea that your brain is a machine, what does a machine do? It's designed for one very specific purpose. And if you use it the right way, it will get the outcome that it's designed to get. But if you use it the wrong way, you end up with problems. So for instance, a motor car, if you know how to drive it and you drive it the right way, it gets you to where you want to go, which is its purpose, easily, enjoyably, and predictably. But if you start messing around with it and doing the wrong things, putting the wrong fuel in, keeping the handbrake on and the accelerator at the same time or whatever, you're going to have a rough ride and you're going to end up with problems. And the brain is exactly the same. So my 4-part model, what that really teaches people is firstly to understand what the 4 parts of your brain actually are and how they're designed to be used. And most importantly, the one of those 4 parts, or really how all those parts all interact with each other, but how one of the 4 parts is specifically designed to be the master of your life and to guide you down the fastest and easiest path to you being the best that you can be. That's what it's there biologically to do. And we all end up with problems and stress because we don't know, firstly, that this part even exists, and secondly, we don't know how to use it the right way. And what I found when I rebuilt my life after, being homeless was I switched into using this part of my brain, not knowing what it was, and things worked out a lot better for me in my life. Things happened a lot more smoothly. All the things that we might call coincidence or luck or synchronicity. Instead of me trying to force success and chase after success, it was like success was coming after me, and all sorts of unexpected things were happening and good things were happening and things were flowing on a lot better without the stress and problems. So brain rebalancing is about understanding how to move your brain to be using it the right way rather than the wrong way. And when you use it the right way, it's remarkable how your problems seem to just fade away. And you find yourself doing that thing that we're all after, which is really feeling, yes, I am in control of my life. I am being the best that I can be. I am doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm actually fulfilled and happy, and I'm not, dealing with stress and problems all the time instead.
Sure. I've got 30 years in training development. I've trained in 6 different countries, 10,000 people, but I also have a sales background. So my sales led into training and development. And where I come to today with what I teach just came from a fascination with the way people communicate. I always was fascinated by people saying, "How are you?" and then never really paying attention to the answer. It was almost like just non-conversation. So that led me into conditioning and neuro-linguistic programming and everything that surrounds that.
So it's interesting how you say that, because I think, for my audience here who are executives, leaders, aspiring leaders, and so forth, when they're meeting people, like when they're in a networking event, first of all, some people just don't like going to networking events. And I think they feel a little bit uncomfortable. But I think what you just said there is really important about when we meet each other. Remembering names is one thing, but how are you and things like that. How important is it for someone to actually listen to what the other person says? What should they be doing?
Well, I think communication should be intentional, especially if you're a leader speaking to other leaders, or you're working with investors, or maybe you're just selling your idea, your concept to somebody else. But speech needs to be intentional. And how are you is really not as intentional. Something more intentional would be, "It's a true pleasure to meet you. I was looking forward to this." And at the end of the pause, that really gets somebody else to respond. But "I was really looking forward to meeting you" is a much more emphatic greeting or enthusiastic greeting that's likely to lead to a reciprocation. The hi, how are you? We're all so conditioned to just do the fine, thanks, or I'm okay, how are you? Just skip that step. And for companies that have sales organizations, please have your salespeople skip that step. It's a non-starter.
Yeah. And I think really good because it's different, right? It's a different way. So it'll actually grab people's attention. Or it's a bit like, how are you? And the response from somebody is, I am fantastic, or
Right.
I'm awesome. And I used to have somebody who used to work for me who used to respond like that. And it would actually create the conversation because people go, whoa, this is different. And it's like, because people don't normally respond like, I'm good. No, good. Yeah, good. Thanks. And it's just a non sort of kind of response, just a sort of average thing, right? Where it's different. And I like what you're saying. Asking that question is different for sure.
Well, it breaks the conditioning. You know, Dennis, we're conditioned from the time we're young to respond certain ways to certain things. Stove is hot, lion is dangerous, razors are sharp. And it gets to be that way with some of our verbiage. And if we can break that conditioning, it not only helps to reset a conversation, but it helps to make both of you think. Because when we're not used to a greeting or response, it's almost like a little reset in our head that takes place. And usually to your benefit if your greeting is strong enough.
Yeah, very good. Good to hear. Now, your background as well is regarded as a fractional chief learning officer. What is that?
It's kind of a fancy way of saying that I come in and I work with a company to develop their training and development. So I help them create onboarding programs. I help them get their salespeople up and profitable. You know, you spend 20,000 and up to bring somebody on board, and it can take 6 months to a year before they're actually making your money back. So I help companies get to that profitability with somebody they hire much quicker. I help them formalize the program, make it consistent across the company, and then make it scalable. So it's no longer something where a new employee comes in and you sit them with a manager who just created a PowerPoint slide deck. Then the next person that comes in gets a completely different experience. There's a lot to be said for consistency of message. And then we take that across and we work with marketing and customer service to really formalize the message so everybody is on the same page. Fractional merely means that I do it in a shorter period of time. So I will come in as the chief learning officer. I only need to work with you a couple of hours a week to make this happen. You don't have to bring me on part-time. I mean, you don't have to bring me on full-time or sign a long-term contract. Let me do my work in the way that's going to be the most cost efficient for you. So I do it in a fractional period of time for a fraction of the money.
That's a different way of doing it. It's great. Jake, you know what? I find that there is, as you say, spend $20,000 bringing somebody on board, hiring them. By the time it's a long period it can take. So the onboarding is going to be very important to try and get them on and hit the road running and get, to be able to bring in sales and so forth to make that
Exactly.
payback time quicker. Now, the thing here is that I presume you're seeing this, I've seen it as well, is that when the onboarding isn't right, when we don't get people underway, the retention is not very good. What are you seeing out there?
It's the exact same thing in the US. When you bring some people on and they don't have a good onboarding experience, you're painting a picture of what the rest of their career is going to look like. Are you investing in them or aren't you? And I often see ads, Dennis, and it really bothers me that says, we pay competitive rates. Okay, then I'll work competitively. You want to pay me the best rates, I'll be the best person that you can get. So I think we really get what we ask for. And part of the whole process of onboarding is not only giving them a good feel of the product and the environment and your demographics, but also a good feel for the company. And it gets them set for the weeks and months to come. And then we just repeat it and we help them grow their skills. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about a sales force, Dennis, is that people just say, well, you're a salesperson, just sell. And it doesn't work like that. Like any CEO needs to go to classes, CFOs, salespeople need it as well.
Well, it's just the same as leaders. Just lead. Well, no, they need to be developed,
Exactly.
right?
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.